Good evening, everyone. Can we all take a seat? We're about to start. Good evening and welcome. I am Victoria McDonald. I am a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Alpha Gamma Alpha Omega Chapter. I want to welcome you to the first forum on public policy hosted by our chapter in partnership with the League of Women Voters. Both of our organizations have been on the battlefield for voting and civil rights for well over a century. We share a common mission to address issues concerning women and girls, because we know that when we uplift all women, we uplift the entire community. The November 5th election is arguably the most consequential election in our nation's history, definitely within my lifetime. We know that whenever we are on the precipice of change, there are always forces that seek to create chaos, often through distortions, distractions, disinformation, and intimidation. Tonight, we endeavor to educate and inform so that we all will be able to discern fact from fiction. Before we begin, I would like to recognize Judge Tony Wallace, the County Court Number 4 presiding judge. Judge Wallace, thank you. Judge Tamika Carter, the 400th Court presiding judge. And Carmen Turner, the tax assessor collector for Fort Bend County. She was in the room, or she is in the building, but we thank her for her attendance even as she's making her way into the sanctuary. All right, I would also like to recognize Henva Metlow, the president of the Alpha Gamma Alpha Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. And Suzanne Green, the president of League of Women Voters of Fort Bend. And I have to say, I would be completely remiss if I did not recognize Pam Gaskin for her awesome work in coordinating this panel. I would also like to remind you that both AKA and the League of Women Voters are nonprofit, nonpartisan organizations, and as such, neither organization endorses candidates or political parties. What we do want to do is encourage everyone to vote early beginning October 21st, Monday, October 21st, and we want you all to make informed selections for every race on your ballot. The League of Women Voters has rather comprehensive resources for informing your vote, and a lot of those resources are available outside on the table. At this time, I will ask the associate pastor of this church, Pastor Roberts, to come forward and open us up with prayer. Pastor Roberts.
Thank you so much. It's a blessing to be here tonight, blessing to be a part of the program. The scripture says that my people perish for a lack of knowledge. So to be able to come in the house to get knowledge, to get truth, and know how to decipher, learn how to use your spirit to discern false information is a blessing. So thank you all for your attendance and being here. Would you please bow your heads? Father God, we just want to say thank you. Thank you so much, Father, for this opportunity. Thank you for your willing vessels, Heavenly Father. Thank you for those who have invested years of their lives for others, Father God. Dedicated to truth, dedicated to doing the right things in this community in order that your light may shine through them, Father God. Right now, we ask that you place your hands over everyone under the sound of my voice, Father, so that your will may go forth, Father. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Father. Have your way, Lord. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen.
Thank you so much, Pastor Roberts. Before I close, I want to remind everyone to write their questions on an index card. If you did not receive one and you would like one, just raise your hand and we will bring one to you. And those cards will be passed to the moderator, and she will ask those questions of the panel. And we will take audience questions following questions from the moderator. Lastly, Melissa Griffith will now come forth with our first raffle. Here she comes. And if you did not, in order to be a participant in the raffle, we need for you to enter your name and address on a commitment card. And it's from these cards that we will select the raffles. And after Melissa, we will have Twyla Dotson, who will introduce our distinguished panel and our moderator. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. It is now time for our first round of raffle. This round, we will be giving away 2 Starbucks gift cards. Monica Rawlins. Okay, one more. All righty, Layla Lemon. Yay! Thank you.
Good evening. Before we get started with introducing the panelists, I would like to recognize Judge Monica Rollins of the 328 Judicial District Court. Okay, good evening. My name is Twyla Dotson, and I'm a member of the Social Justice and Connection Committee with the Alpha Gamma Alpha Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, and I have been given charge to introduce our esteemed panelists this evening. First, we have Ms. Rashonda Tate. Ms. Tate is a highly sought-after motivational speaker and award-winning poet. A well-respected journalist for more than 2 decades, Rashonda has worked as a television reporter, and anchor for stations in Oklahoma City, Beaumont, and Houston. She is also a managing editor for the Houston Defender newspaper and also works as a professional editor, ghostwriter, and literary consultant. A graduate of the University of Texas at Austin, Rashonda is a member of the Missouri City Sugarland chapters of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated and Jack and Jill of America. She is married to Jeffrey Carradine and is the mother of 3 children ages 23, 21, and 16, and 2 bonus children ages 24 and 23. You may visit her at her website at www.rashondatate.com. Ladies and gentlemen, Rashonda Tate. Our next panelist is Mr. Edgar Saldivar. Edgar Saldivar is a senior staff attorney who represents ACLU clients in high-impact litigation in federal and state courts across Texas. Edgar manages trial teams in the fight against voter suppression by the state of Texas, including the historic challenge to SB 1, a nefarious voter suppression law passed by the state of Texas in 2021. In November 2020, he successfully represented voting rights organizations against efforts to void over 120,000 drive-through votes casted in Harris County, Texas, the 3rd largest county in the U.S. He also serves on the statewide nonpartisan Election Protection Coalition. A sought-after public speaker, Edgar has testified before Congress, the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, and the Texas Legislature. He's been a guest lecturer at Harvard Law School, NYU School of Law, Duke University School of Law, and Wiley College, a historically Black institution that also honored Edgar as its with its Men of Strength Award for his demonstrated commitment to educate youth, inspire, and lead. Born and raised in Texas and fluent in Spanish, Edgar is the son of Mexican immigrants. He graduated cum laude from Harvard University with a BA in philosophy. He received his JD from the University of Houston Law Center and then completed his postgraduate courses in psychology and French at Rice University. Ladies and gentlemen, Edgar Saldivar. Our last panelist is Mr. John Oldham. Mr. Oldham has served over 16 years as the Fort Bend County Elections Administrator. He is a native of Southern Indiana and has lived for many years in Metropolis, Illinois. He was twice elected county clerk in Massac County, Illinois. After leaving that office, he continued working in the election industry in sales and support of voting systems. He served as a state manager in both Indiana and Illinois for election systems and software and has supported elections in 26 states and Canada. He has also served as an adjunct instructor at Shawnee Community College in Illinois, teaching government and economics. He is a graduate of Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, where he also did a postgraduate work in public administration. His wife, Debbie, also works in elections as a project manager in Vanderburgh and Posey counties in Indiana. They have 2 daughters and 3 granddaughters living in Paducah, Kentucky. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. John Oldham. Last but not least, I'm also going to introduce our moderator for the evening, Ms. Vernice Bell. She is a member of the League of Women Voters, Fort Bend, and she currently serves as the treasurer of that organization. She has been a resident of Houston, Missouri City area for over 40 years and has participated in numerous community volunteer activities, public education campaigns, task force, boards of directors, and advisory boards. She is also a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Over the years, Vernice has been self-employed, okay, offering her expertise in the areas of small business development and workforce development. She has provided direct assistance to over 400 small and minority-owned businesses in developing and attaining their goals. Vernice has a BS and a BA from Murray State University in Murray, Kentucky, and an MBA from Houston Baptist University. Without further ado, I give you Madam Moderator.
Thank you, and good evening. Glad to see so many faces in the house. Now, panel, I will try to be very brief and succinct with our questions for this evening. My first question is to John Olam, and that question is, if you could tell voters one thing to assure them about the integrity of elections in Fort Bend County, what would that one thing be?
Well, first I'd speak to the integrity of elections throughout the country. We have a system that is, we're having a national election in a few weeks, but it's not a national election. It's not even 50 state elections. It's about 8,000 individual elections. So we're very decentralized, and that gives us certain strengths in terms of tabulation of votes, in terms of security from outside interference, from hacking. I got my first job in elections in 1974. So I've met a plethora of people over the years involved in this industry, and even though we're government, it's still an industry. And I've never met anybody who wasn't dedicated to serving the people, to doing a good job, to delivering services, to ensuring that everybody who's entitled to vote gets to vote, and those who aren't entitled to vote don't vote, to ensuring that ballots are tabulated correctly. I think for here in the county, we have, and it's certainly since 2004, throughout the country, we've been under a lot more scrutiny. And that's not necessarily, it's aggravating, obviously, as Jonathan Marcantel back there can tell you. He's our presiding judge of Central Count. But it's not necessarily a bad thing. Transparencies, we have now cameras throughout our offices which display everything going on. We have cameras in Central Count. As soon as our ballot board starts processing ballots, you can view them 24/7 online. You can view what we're doing in terms of ballot preparation and tabulation, so on and so forth. So, the events of 2020 resulted in a lot more transparency, a lot more information, and a lot more security. We do a lot of poll worker training. All of our poll workers go through about 6 hours of training, so they know what to do, and about half of that training is how to securely secure and transport ballots and media back to in the polling place and back to our office. We do, and most states do, some sort of auditing. We've always done what's called a partial manual count, even though we're basically electronic tabulation. The day after the election, the Secretary of State chooses certain precincts for us to manually count. And we actually use our ballot board to do that, so we're not doing it ourselves. But over the years we've done this, we've never been off. In other words, if they tell us we're going to count 3 precincts or 3 early voting sites and compare them to our final results, it's always on the money. So the equipment works, our poll workers work correctly. Beginning next year after next, we're also going to be doing what is called, we're going to be doing election audits, which is doing more than simply recounting the votes. It's going to be a state mandate to do, to compare chain of custody logs, which we do already, but be much more intense in terms of auditing there. So there's a lot of things that go into this, and some of that is a result of, we see things happen as a result of elections which people have doubts about. We saw this back in 2000 with the Bush-Gore election and the hanging Chad. That resulted in the elimination of punch cards. It eliminated a lot of federal money being spent. Probably what ended all that controversy was terrorists flying a plane into buildings. And then also we didn't have social media, which is a big, perpetuates some of the misinformation and disinformation from 2000. But I appreciate the opportunity to be here. It's good to see members of the League of Women Voters. We work with you, and we really appreciate the League. It's good to see some of the, we've seen many of you, including one of my neighbors back here, Linda Webb, but we appreciate this opportunity and appreciate the work that the League does.
John mentioned misinformation and disinformation, and we hear these terms a lot. Can you explain the difference?
Yes, so misinformation is you just get information wrong. Disinformation is you are deliberately misleading people. Unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of both. I used to work for the National Enquirer. Yes, I was the paparazzi. The sad part about it is that I left that job years ago because there was no integrity in the reporting. I am seeing now the same type of thing that I left tabloid news about. And social media plays a large part in that. If you go now to X, one of the trending stories is President Biden's Storm-O-Matic machine. If you don't know what a Storm-O-Matic machine is, according to X and the thousands and thousands of people who have commented, it is a machine where he redirects the hurricanes to go cause damage to Republican areas. And that is going rampant on X right now to the point that it is trending. And common sense, people with common sense, so many of us, we laugh that off and we're like, okay, that's so crazy. Nobody's going to believe that. The fact that it is trending shows us that they do. If you are on social media at all, you see the number of people that argue you down. There's a video of it. There's a video of someone eating a cat and a Haitian woman eating a cat. She was an American woman. She wasn't eating a cat, but the story has traveled, as my grandmother says, a lie travels around the country twice before the truth gets out of bed. And we are seeing so much more of that because people take anything they see online as gospel. When you ask for proof, they'll say, I saw it on YouTube. Anybody can make a YouTube. And so we see that misinformation and disinformation traveling so fast, and those of us that have common sense tend to blow it off, and it's continuing to run rampant.
Okay, thank you. Edgar, if you think your rights are being violated at the polls, what steps should we take?
Thank you. Yeah, so if you think your rights are violated at the polls, first and foremost, or if you think that your rights could be in danger at the polls as you prepare to go vote, it's highly recommended to review, whether it's on our website or our partners' websites, League of Women Voters websites, what your rights are at the polls. The ACLU of Texas is part of the National American Civil Liberties Union. For the last almost 100 years, we've been fighting in the courts and the legislatures and the streets to protect and defend the civil rights of all persons. And that includes the most basic fundamental right, which is the right to vote. And so this is something that for us is part of our priorities at the state. We're trying to prevent voter suppression that has been going on through an unbroken history since the founding of this state. So it's important to also be mindful of the context here. So it's something that we're hoping not to see intimidation. We're hoping not to see threats at the poll, but it is important to be aware of your rights. What can you do? There's several things that we recommend. First and foremost, it's important to ask a poll worker or an election worker, whether it's the election judge or others, and call attention to whatever the issue may be. Now, there could be all sorts of issues that could arise. There could be issues with regards to, your registration not showing up on the voter rolls. We've heard recently in the news of efforts to purge voter rolls, and not just in Harris County, but in different parts of the state. And so if that happens, it's important to ask whether they can review the voter roll again, do a double check. If that doesn't work, you can request from a poll worker or election worker to see if there's a supplemental list where your voter registration might show up. Oftentimes, if you register late or close to the election, not late, but close to the election, you could be put on a supplemental list. There's a whole host of issues that could arise. What I would highly recommend is you remember this number, 1-866-OUR-VOTE. That's statewide election protection hotline where lawyers and advocates trained to address questions on issues that could arise at the polls can answer questions. So 1-866-OUR-VOTE is where we recommend people calling. It's the statewide election protection hotline. It's a nonpartisan effort comprised of nonpartisan nonprofit organizations like the ACLU. Thank you.
I'd like to recognize Judge Surendran Patel, who's just joined us in the audience, with the 240th Judicial District Court. Thank you. And now I think we're up for another raffle.
Alrighty, our last round. So for this round, we will be raffling 2 tickets to the Sorari Bus Tours, which is a local bus tour service which offers, a convenient way to explore Black Houston. So Black art, Black history, Black culture, and Black businesses. 3rd Ward, Juneteenth tour. So you get to see what we have hidden here in the Houston area. So y'all ready? I know everybody's on edge. Lisa Hall. Thank you. Enjoy. Stephanie Rivera. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Back to our questions. Rashonda, please. Could you tell us how do we check the legitimacy of something that we see online, and what should we do to respond, if anything?
Yeah, so this is something you really do have to be cognizant of. I am an avid fact checker. I check things left and right, and the other day I saw a video of Hillary Clinton talking about Diddy. And I was like, why would Hillary say that? And I have a friend that I bounce everything off before I post it. And she said, are you even looking at her lips not moving? And I was just scrolling and I saw this video. I put my glasses on and then the lips didn't match. But imagine I hadn't taken that time to send it to my friend, to look closer, I would have spread that information. And that's what misinformation is. You're spreading false information without the intent of being misleading. So really you have to fact check. Fact check, triple check, and then always look at the source. I can't tell you the number of people that share stuff, and at the very bottom it says satire. But people continue to share it because we're in an era now where everybody wants to be the first to get it on their social media website, on their social media sites. So make sure you fact check, have a person that you bounce things off before you go and post it. Don't take anything that you see as gospel that you're looking online. And then it is really up to us as a community, because what happens so often, I know we're nonpartisan, so we're supposed to walk a fine line. And so I will just say how, as a journalist, we're always trying to be objective. The reason that we are in this situation that we are in now, where you have people, certain people that just say what they want, is because journalists are not fact-checking them. Now you see a lot of people shifting to fact-checking, but not doing so allowed us to be in the position that we are today. And so your duty as a citizen is to fact check. We have a tendency to just look at something and say, oh, these people are crazy, and keep scrolling. Now, by no means am I saying get into an argument with everybody online, but whenever you can, correct someone, and they will be adamant. They will say, oh no, he has that Stormatic machine and he sent Hurricane Milton straight to Sarasota because it's it's a red state. And if you can, just say that's not true. That's not true. Go to the FEMA website, and they're going to argue 27 other places they've seen videos and how you got the Stormatic on sale at Amazon Prime. And so you really do have to just not throw your hands up at the misinformation and the disinformation. So fact check. Also stay off of X in terms of as your news source. MIT researchers recently did a report, and they said false news spreads more rapidly on X than anywhere else in the universe. So if you go on now, and you will see a whole long list of incorrect information. All of the stuff going on with FEMA right now, that is not a time for us to be having misinformation and disinformation. So do your part by not spreading it.
Edgar, what do I do if my voter registration is challenged when I go to the polls? Do I just say forget it, or what I do?
No, you never say forget it. You know, I mentioned earlier the opportunity to ask election workers to double check the voter rolls, to check supplemental lists. You have the right to ask for that. Election workers are required to assist and help out. So don't be afraid to ask for help. The other option is to call our hotline, as I mentioned, to get further assistance if there's a particular issue. But at the very end, if you're not on the voter registration list for whatever reason, and you know or you believe that you should be on there, you can request a provisional ballot. A provisional ballot will allow you to submit a ballot that will give you time after the election's over to go and present IDs or whatever issue is arisen and correct it so that that provisional ballot counts. Now, you have a limited amount of time to correct or to present proof of that after the election, but it's important at the very least to request a provisional ballot. I can't stress enough how important it is to know just these very basic things. If at the end of the day you experience other problems, there's even a Department of Justice voter line where you can call and request assistance or report an issue. But there's always ways to address it, and at the very end, ask for a provisional ballot if nothing else works. Again, these laws in Texas are unbelievably complicated. Voting has been made to be more difficult, to be burdensome to voters. And again, this is not new to our state. You know, some of these voter suppression laws that we're using or that we're challenging, we're using laws that go back to the Reconstruction era, where the federal government had to pass what were called enforcement acts to force officials not to deny the vote to newly freed persons. So again, we're using laws that go back to the beginning of voter suppression efforts to try to challenge them. So it's not new to us, but it's important to be mindful to know your rights and to know that at the very least you can ask for a provisional ballot.
John, would you like to chime in on that area as well?
Yes, I would. And I disagree a little bit with Edgar because you should not have to ask for a provisional ballot. We train our poll workers to offer a provisional ballot to a voter if there's an issue. Now, Texas is, it's not as bad, quite all that bad. For example, I've worked in Illinois for years, and there you had people, including watchers in the polling place, who would challenge people's registration based on residency. You can't do that in a polling place in Texas. The only reason you might get challenged is if your ID doesn't, if it's not your ID. You know, for example, if it's not your picture, if it's a different person, if it says you're 80 years old and you look like you're 21, those are the reasons why you might get challenged. You also may be asked to update your residency using a statement of residence. If you haven't done what you're supposed to do and updated your registration. But one thing that's nice in Texas is even if you haven't updated your registration, and for example, in Illinois, you used to not be able to get to vote. Indiana, you used to not be able to get to vote, or you could for one election. Here, you could have moved 6 years ago and you still go in and fill out a statement of residency. So long as you still live in Fort Bend County, you can still vote. So we're not quite as suppressive as some people think we are. We also we will have open 32 early voting sites, which is until a couple of years ago, 31 more than Cook County, Illinois had. So we do a lot of early voting, which offers a lot of opportunities. But going back to registration a little bit, if I can ramble, Edgar mentioned something about purging. Purging is something that we have to do. It's required under state law. It's required under the National Voter Registration Act. But it has to be non-discriminatory purging. And there's two ways we do it. Last January, you got a yellow voter registration card in the mail. It's not for ID purposes. It's a way of purging. Because when we mail out 500,000 of those, we'll get 50,000 back, okay, as addressee unknown or addressee moved. When we do that, because they're non-forwardable, we then will mail a second mailing to that address if we don't get an updated forwarding address that will be forwarded, or we will mail it to both that address and the one the post office gives us. And if we don't hear from these people, as soon as that card comes back, you go on suspense. You're not canceled, you stay on suspense for 2 federal elections, which might be over 3 years. Then you're canceled if you don't turn up. We also can purge using a non-discriminatory fashion called NCLA compare, which we will compare the post office's database to our database, and we do that about once every 2 years. So we do 3 purges every 2 years. And basically, we put people on suspense. And we wish we didn't have to do purges. We wish people would update their registrations when they move, or when they move to another state, let us know that, or when their mother dies, whatever. But again, it's a way of keeping the voter rolls clean, which helps protect your right to vote, as well as keeping us from having to produce more ballots. But it is a normal thing. There hasn't been an increase, despite what we may have read in the media. We haven't suddenly purged more voters. We purge voters every year. But we do it in a non-discriminatory fashion, and we don't cancel people. In fact, we even find it hard to cancel people who die, because if it's Social Security information, we can't do. It's very challenging to do that, because most people, unless we have a social number or TDL, we can't cancel them. And many old people who registered You didn't get that information from them 30 years ago, so a lot of them will stay on the rolls. And I always tell people, you know, if we don't catch you when you first die, we don't get a notice saying you're still dead. You know, people will say, well, so my neighbor died 6 years ago, why are they still on the rolls? Well, maybe they died in Louisiana and nobody told us. And we don't get something saying your neighbor's still dead. So it's useful information. Now, we had a lot of challenges to registrations this summer from people who were challenging based upon NCOA data. We could not act on any of those because they weren't notarized and they didn't. Texas law says another voter can challenge residency, not at the polling place, but beforehand, but it has to be based on personal knowledge. In other words, if you knew your neighbor moved and they're not there anymore, you could challenge their registration, but you can't go down and say, or if you knew that we had an apartment building coded in the wrong precinct, you could challenge that, but you can't just wholesale challenge people based upon post office data.
And if I can chime in, I think it's important to pay close attention to what John said, which everything he said is accurate. There is a cleaning of voter rolls, especially because people die. That's a part of the normal process. But listen carefully to what he said. You cannot do it in a discriminatory way. So when we call attention to voter purges, we're calling attention to the voter purges where people are challenging the voter rolls not based on personal knowledge, not supported by affidavit, and oftentimes targeting black and brown communities. The voter roll purges that you've heard about in the news most recently were efforts and are current efforts by the state's AG to challenge and purge people who they suspect of being non-citizens. Well, how do you think they're going about doing that other than looking at last names and seeing which ones are in Spanish? Okay, because the problem with this approach is that many non-citizens eventually become citizens. They go through a naturalization process, and that was proven in 2019 when the state tried to purge over 90,000 names from voter rolls, and then we sued along with other partners, and we challenged that, and as it turns out, many of the people they were purged were US citizens. Okay, so when we're talking about purging of the voter rolls and the importance of checking and double checking that your name is on the voter rolls, we're talking about protecting yourself against these sinister efforts that may not happen in Fort Bend County, may not happen in some parts of the state, but I bet you they're happening as we speak in many parts. So just be mindful of that. Again, as I mentioned to John when we were chatting, the work that election administrators do is difficult work, but it's important work. And we consider ourselves partners with them in the effort to protect elections, to make sure elections run smoothly, and most important, to ensure that every voice that is eligible to vote can vote, because that is the mission of the ACLU. We're here to protect the most fundamental rights so that every person in the state of Texas can feel that they have an equal say in the decisions that shape our society, so that people can become civically engaged and really have that vote that so many of our ancestors have fought and died for.
Okay, I have a few questions from the audience, and anyone can chime in with this answer. The first one is, why are veterans asked if they have ID with an address on it after they have shown their military ID? So I guess the question is, what are the acceptable forms of identification?
Basically, it is anything issued by the government that has a photograph that has an expiration date. Now, the exception to that is, and although it's not stated specifically in the law, but the Secretary of State has taken the position that and it could be a card, for example, some military IDs say indefinite on them, which would be an expiration date. It's an expiration date that's not going to happen, but there's supposed to be an expiration date on that. Now, when we first started photo ID, the ID could be expired up to 6 months. Now I believe it's 4 years and still be valid. And even if it's expired longer than that, there's alternative forms of identification. If you don't have an ID, you can do an affidavit, you can produce a utility bill, you can produce a driver's license from expired longer than that, you can produce a driver's license from Louisiana with an affidavit, assuming you're a registered voter. Now, again, I don't know what procedures take place in every county. We try to go by directives of the Secretary of State, and we try to be, with veterans cards, they can be an indefinite expiration date, but the ID is supposed to have an expiration date.
Okay. Here's another question, either for you or for Edgar. There's a misunderstanding about felons being able to vote or not being able to vote. Many think they can't. Explain if they can or if they cannot.
You want it or want me to take it?
You can go and I can.
Okay. Okay, well, again, this is, as I mentioned, we have 50 different states and 50 different sets of rules. It varies from state to state. In Texas, once you are finally convicted of an offense, and this can get challenging for us because we'll get information from the court system saying someone is convicted of a felony, which at that point we cancel their registration. However, that may not be a a final conviction. They'll ask for deferred adjudication, and that is the case, we will reinstate them. But they generally don't bother to tell us that until they show up at the polling place and start complaining. But again, it varies. Now, if it's a misdemeanor, that's going to affect your registration. If it is a felony and you've finished your incarceration, if you're incarcerated, or the terms of your probation, you can then apply to be a registered voter again. There's no permanent ban on voting. I know some states have that, but some don't and cancel for felony convictions either. So there's 50 different rules out there.
Yeah, and what I was going to add is, we represent Crystal Mason, who is a Texas voter who had served jail time for a felony but had been on probation. She believed she was eligible to vote and went to vote. Her ballot was never cast because it was a provisional ballot. Nevertheless, the state of Texas charged her with a crime. To this day, we're appealing that case to the highest courts in Texas. But the reality is, it is important to know exactly what the laws are regarding felony or voting if you have a felony conviction. As John mentioned, you have to have completed the terms of your probation. You have to have completed the sentence, and it's one of those basic rules on eligibility for voting that you can see on the League of Women Voter websites or on the ACLU websites or the county's websites when you see the tab for are you eligible to vote. Again, it's super important, but I just want to point out that the reason there's confusion is because of cases like Crystal's. Cases where, for a simple mistake, you could get charged with a crime, your life can be turned over, and what's the effect of that? The effect of that is that not only will Crystal and potentially her family, but anyone who hears about it will have second thoughts about wanting to go cast a vote, even if you've completed all terms of your sentence or penalties. So again, it's important to understand your rights in this context, and I think that's a great question.
And may I add that Crystal's case has been upheld by judges who were voted in, which means that is the importance of your local votes as well.
we have a little additional time, let's look at the actual operation of the poll. So how are the election judges selected, and then the poll workers? Are they all volunteer? Are they paid? What is that process?
Oh, the process is this, and we're going through the throes of that right now. Election judges are appointed in July in counties our size by Commissioner's Court based upon lists submitted by the parties, the two parties and major parties. Constitutionally or statutorily, it's for 1 year. They serve, although counties in ours years ago adopted a procedure where they're appointed for 2 years, which I'm grateful for. Those people are vetted by, and again, they're chosen from lists submitted by the court. It's sort of a routine thing. The parties submit it, the court approves it, and they become election judges. Same thing with the alternate judges. The clerks under law are hired by the judges, the election clerks on election day. Although, and we that's pretty much the way it's always been in Fort Bend County. However, in the past year, the statute basically says that they should be hired from a list approved by the parties. And neither one of our parties really ever did that. This year, one of them started doing that, which has created some issues for some of our longtime judges because the people they've always worked with, they can't work with now. But that's not illegal. That's following the law. Early voting clerks are chosen by the parties. However, they're not appointed by the court. They're basically extensions of our office. I am the early voting clerk in Fort Bend County, and these people are all basically deputies of my office. Now, not everybody understands that clearly. They think they're judges. They think they have the same power as an election day judge, which they really don't. They are extensions of our office. But they, again, now as far as being paid, our judges and our early voting clerks are paid $20 an hour. That's the highest paid people in the state of Texas. We did that, you can thank Grady Prestige for that. Back in 2000 during the pandemic, he thought we ought to incent people to do that. I'm not necessarily crazy about that because it burns our budget, but and our clerks are paid $17 an hour. So they again are also the highest paid in the state of Texas. Harris pays the same thing. So we also pay our clerks, our poll workers, for coming to training at their going rate, whether $20 or $30 an hour. We do minimally 3 hours of equipment training for our new people, refresher training. This is hands-on. We have a professional trainer as a member of our staff. We also pay for paperwork training, which we didn't used to do, but now we do because paperwork has gotten so damn complicated. And we also pay for when they come to what we call election law training, which they basically come for an hour to 2 hours and listen to me ramble. By the way, I want to introduce my assistant administrator, Chase Wilson. Chase has been with the county 8 years now. He's been in his current position almost 2 years. And he makes my life much easier. So,
Can I add something? There are a couple of things I wanted. I know that many of us have live fatigue. We are tired of the misinformation and the disinformation, and we're just ready for this election to be over. And we have a tendency to dismiss it. I'm looking now at one of the top trending stories coming from a rally tonight from a presidential candidate who shall not be named, but said, this is the headline that is trending: your child goes to school and they take your child, it was a he and comes back a she. And they do this and they do it without parental consent. Now my son in Fort Bend can't even get a Tylenol without from his nurse, but they're having sex change surgeries according to this headline that was given tonight. Now 300,000 people are watching that live. And let's say 200,000 know it's a lie. There are tons of people that are sharing this going, oh, wow, oh, my goodness. And our tendency is to just go, okay, everybody knows that's a lie. I'm just going to dismiss it. And the disinformation continues to spread. So we cannot get tired of the lie fatigue right now. We have to continue to be vocal in helping to spread the truth through trusted sources. And another thing is, if you see something, say something with our media outlets. If you need examples on how to do that, Pam Gaskin, who will send me a text at 7 a.m. in the morning if anything is wrong on the Defender Network. I love it because it keeps you on your toes. I have a new reporter. I didn't even notice that she said voters were suspended. And at 6 a.m., Pam is like, no, it's not suspended, it's in suspense. And it helps to have all of those eyes because people come to us. We have hundreds of thousands of people who come and see our website. And so misinformation is a legitimate error that some people make. And it is vital that if we see something, say something. Don't be afraid to call the Chronicle or call Fox 26 or send a text and just say that information is wrong, because the people doing it are human.
One last question. Do you have to register to vote every election?
Once you register, you should stay registered. And you really should not have to do anything else unless you move, okay? Or unless you change your name. That could be from getting married, it could be from a sex change operation, who knows? But really, you don't have to interact with our office in terms of voter registration once you're registered. Now, some states will purge for non-participation. In other words, you don't vote for 4 years, you could be put on suspense or you could be purged. We don't do that in Texas. Again, we're all our laws are different everywhere you go. But again, you don't have to register. Now, the people that do are those who are overseas and apply using a federal postcard application, which you can have been born in Fort Bend County, your family moved 50 years ago, and you're living in France, and you can submit an FPCA and get a ballot in this election. Now, there's 4 questions on there. Are you military? Are you a citizen expecting to return? And that, if you fill those out, you become a permanent registrant. If you mark, I'm overseas, I'm a citizen, but I don't know if I'm coming back or not, then you only get a federal ballot. And then finally, if you mark that you've never lived in the country, in Texas you don't get to vote, okay? So some states you would, but not in Texas.
Yeah, and just to add to that is I would urge folks to really, if you have the time and you have access to it, take a look at some of these websites, whether it's the leagues, whether it's the ACLUs that provide this basic information. You can even check the website for the Election Protection Hotline, because the reality is, as you've heard tonight, a lot of these laws are just very complicated. Texas has made voting one of the most complicated processes, and it's more complicated and harder to vote in Texas than in many other places. So again, urging you that, as Ms. Tate was suggesting, education is going to be key here. As the Reverend mentioned, lack of education will be our parish. This idea of educating ourselves and knowing how the civic laws and civic engagement works is the key to figuring out how to be an active participant and have a say in our society, and that's what we're striving to do here.
Do we have time to talk about absentee voting?
We do.
Okay.
I have this final.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were
My other
done.
final question.
Okay.
If you're in the military, how do you cast your vote? So that could be by absentee vote.
Well, if you're in the military, you can apply using a federal postcard application. We can accept those applications by email or fax. We can email your ballot to you, and the same with a U.S. citizen overseas. It has to be returned, though. You can print it, you can mark it, you can send it back to us, but it has to be sent by mail or by common carrier like UPS, DXL. A very limited number of people can return it by electronically. Astronauts in space and members of the military in hostile fire zones, which we really don't have too many of those out there now. But in general and ballot by mail, this is where our laws are challenging for people, because Texas is kind of unique in this, in that we have reasons you can vote by mail, and about 85% of our people who vote by mail are 65 years of age or older. A few are disabled. You can apply for a ballot by mail using what's called an annual application, and you will get ballots every year or all year long for every election in which you're eligible. We don't have a permanent absentee roll, which a few states do, not many. And I personally am against that, because you don't know if when somebody dies, you're still mailing ballots out there. But if you're out of town, this is where the challenge arises. In many states like Illinois, you would say, I'm going to be out of town, send me a ballot to my home. In Texas, if you're under 65 and you're healthy, we can't mail a ballot to an address within Fort Bend County. It has to be to an address outside of Fort Bend County. So if you're going to be out of town and you're leaving on the day before early voting starts, and you won't be back till the day after the election, you're SOL. You're not going to get a ballot unless you have an address outside of the county where you can mail. We can mail. That's possible. You have a daughter in Montgomery County, and you could say, mail my ballot to me, care of my daughter. Or you work in Houston and you're off, you can get mail at your office, but we cannot mail a ballot here. We also cannot process a ballot submitted by fax or email. When I first got to Texas, we could accept fax transmissions. It made no sense that we couldn't get email transmissions, and I got Rick Miller to sponsor a bill to allow email transmissions, and that was great. At least I thought it was. I mean, I think it's more secure. We're more likely to see fraud coming from a known IP address than we are in a plain white envelope with a crayon written on the front, you know. But a few years ago, the legislature did away with all electronic transmission of applications, although they allow it to basically as a placeholder. If you're up against the ballot by mail deadline, you can submit it by email, and it will extend that deadline by 4 days. But it really doesn't do a whole lot of good, because if you wait till the 26th and you extend it to the 30th, you're not going to get that ballot and get it back to us anyway. So this is one of the challenges for people in Texas, is voting by mail. And again, I know the notion here is it has to do with fraud, and to be perfectly honest, as I say, somebody mentioned, I started working in elections in 1974, and I've seen all kinds of fraud, and most all of it is ballot by mail fraud. But you don't really see that here so much, and it tends to be ballot harvesting and other things. But again, we've had kind of a knee-jerk reaction to the fear of that rather than the reality of it here in Texas.
And that's absolutely right, because the whole concept of voter fraud is really a myth. Statistically, it happens almost 0% of the time if you just look at it statistically. But you know, we're talking about mail ballots. It is one of the most challenging parts of voting. In fact, SB1, the voter suppression law that passed in 2021, made it even harder to vote by mail. It required people to put 2 forms of IDs on mail ballots after having already presented IDs to register to vote, and to one of 2 forms of it. But the point is that for us at the ACLU, in order to protect the right to people to access mail ballot and be able to cast a vote by mail, we're suggesting they put both forms of ID on it. I know that Mr. Oldham said that you only need one or one of the 2, but if you don't know which of your IDs was already in the system, whether it was a driver's license or social security number or something else, we recommend putting both of them on there. Now, let me mention something, and I just want to shout out someone in the audience, because one of our witnesses in the SB1 trial who helped us achieve a recent victory on this mail balloting issue is our very own Pam Gaskin. As a member of the League of Women Voters, she testified about her efforts to cast a ballot and the difficulties that she experienced from the new burdensome requirements of SB 1. And after a 6-week trial in San Antonio Federal Court and months of waiting from the judge, we finally got a decision a couple weeks ago that we had won on First Amendment, which is free speech grounds, the right to challenge SB 1 as unconstitutional. The judge in federal court determined it was unconstitutional. And so that part of SB 1 is now being challenged in the appeals courts. The state immediately appealed. But nevertheless, I just want to give kudos to Pam because her testimony played a key role in a historic trial. The reason I say it's historic is, again, voter suppression challenges and efforts to make it difficult for people to vote have a long history in our state. Since the founding of our state, both black and brown communities have had trouble accessing it, and it's been an intentional effort. Now, in today's society, there are many counties that are doing the right thing. We have a completely different society from what we had before. But at the very end, know that this fight against voter suppression and the reason why this election is so important is because it's part of a long, unbroken history of efforts to intentionally deny the right to vote to certain groups in our state. And so, so think about that, and think about the fact that every chance you get to go vote, to bring someone to go vote, is a chance to fight back and to make your voice heard and make our communities be part of the broader society.
John, have you had any threats or problems from outside sources?
Well, we have problems. We haven't really had threats. And I know a lot of people have. I know Jackie Callanan over in Bexar County has had people come to her house, come to her children's houses, basically threatening, maybe in a non-threatening manner, but you know what the intent is. The other places have too. We haven't really experienced that. We've had visits from and discussions with election deniers, people who are so-called election experts that come into the office and tell me things that I say, hell man, I was there. I've been doing this for a long time. I saw this. I know these people. And I had a guy come in and tell me that the governor of Colorado started American Information Systems, which is a predecessor to ES&S, for when he was in school. And I said, you know, he must have been in nursery school because he would have been 4 years old. So you get this stuff going out there, and seriously, that happened. And this was one of our so-called experts who did symposiums, 3 or 4 of them here in the county, and a lot of people came and listened, and has gone all over the country talking about how machines can be hacked and how there's these algorithms out there that will flip votes and all this good stuff. It ain't true. Believe me, it isn't true, but we're back in the season of misinformation. Just as I remember back in 2002, I guess, or 2004 in the presidential election, I was personally absolutely convinced that Osama bin Laden would send out one of his videotapes from his cave and say, we have hacked the American voting system and we're going to pick your next president, and everybody would, 20% of the population would believe him. Fortunately, he wasn't as smart as people thought he was, and he didn't do that. But nonetheless, again, social media, we're in the season of disinformation. And Edgar mentioned several sources. Our website is a good source of information. The votetexas.org, the Secretary of State's website, is a good source of information. So go to those before you believe everything you read online.
Let's see. Well, okay, I have one hidden question here. How do you become a county election administrator?
A lobotomy. Election administrators, elections are run by different people in different states. For most of the states, it's run by county clerks or district clerks. In Indiana, elections are run by the the court clerk. They don't really have county clerks. Illinois, the county clerk runs the election with a very few exceptions where they have election commissions. Those are generally cities. DuPage County has a countywide one. In what we call home rule states, like Maine, most of the New England states and Michigan, their elections are run by a whole group of people. Every city runs their own election, and then the county runs their election. So I remember one time being in Kent County, Michigan, and we were accumulating votes from 21 different municipalities and the county to merge them all together that night. So it can get convoluted. But again, it varies from place to place. Constitutionally in Texas, the county clerk runs the elections. The tax collector is supposed to be the voter registrar. However, about 3 or 4 years ago, Texas passed enabling legislation to combine those duties into the office of what is called an election administrator. And we were one of the very first counties to adopt that. We've had one for, I don't know exactly when, but right at 30 years now. So we've been doing it a long time. And it makes sense. Florida has election administrators, but they are elected. I'm appointed by the Commissioner's Court, but based upon a recommendation by what's called the County Election Commission, which has only one purpose, that's to hire and to fire, recommend hiring me, recommend firing me. And fortunately, it takes a 4-to-1 vote to do that, but it varies from state to state. But again, I got out of college, I went to work on the political side for a few years, and then I got burned out. Then I eventually ran for county clerk in our county. Then I went to work for a vendor. Then I came back to the government side, which I like better. The money isn't as good, but I like it better. And so that's how I did it. Chase, I hope one day will have my job. And he came to work moving equipment in our warehouse. And he has a degree in philosophy too, but he's a smart guy, and he's added a lot to our office, and hopefully, but there's a lot of different paths. And some of these folks in Texas, you can have they're not necessarily the biggest counties. Some of them are tiny counties. Some of them have a few hundred voters. And there, it may be a part-time job, and it may be somebody's cousin or sister-in-law who's hired as the election administrator. So it varies from place to place.
That concludes my questions, unless there are any more from the audience. As far as the discriminatory purging, is it election administrators, government officials doing it? Who is doing the discriminatory purging?
We're still trying to figure that out, and we're trying to get a sense of where it's coming from. But what we do know is that the state attorney general has requested from the Secretary of State lists of people that they suspect of being non-citizen. That was not provided right away, and so a request was made to the federal government by the state of Texas through the AG for that information, because they want to determine who is a non-citizen and who is not. So what we do know is that the state of Texas, through its current leadership, is advancing on a statewide level this effort to figure out who they suspect is a non-citizen for the purpose or allegation of determining whether they are engaging in voting. Now, I will tell you from our research, from what we have learned, and from what we have seen, non-citizen voting is very rare. So I don't want to give much air to that myth, air to that allegation. But it's coming from places like that. The other place where it's coming from, and when I say we're trying to figure out, is we want to get details and understand specifically who is behind these campaigns. But John mentioned that there are certain groups that are engaging in what are called voter challenges, where legally they are allowed to challenge whether someone is a voter in a certain county or not. But, as John mentioned, they have to have personal knowledge, they have to attest to it via an affidavit, and when that's not done, then that challenge cannot go forward, and I'm thankful that Fort Bend County is taking a close look at those and considering those. So when we're looking at the threat of purges, we're looking at it from both the very top at the state level to the grassroots level, where you have certain groups who want to disrupt elections, who want to change the voter rolls for their political reasons. That's what we're looking at. One thing I also wanted to mention is, one theme that I've heard a lot today is that in many cases, for example, being able to fax your voter registration card in the past when you couldn't. It reminds me of when I first went into a voting booth. I was actually 14 or 15, something around there. It was 1992, but I was accompanying my mom to vote for the very first time. She had just become a US citizen. This was a presidential election, and she was excited. This was in my hometown of Pasadena, Texas, and we went to the fire station where they had the voting booth, and she went in, she came out and mentioned how for her it was such an important moment because she felt like she finally belonged to the community that we lived in. Now, I was there as her interpreter. I was there to translate the ballot, to guide her in terms of what it said, so that she could decide who she wanted to vote for. And so this was 1992. Today, under SB 1, under the current laws that we have, my mom would not have been able to cast a ballot that way. I would not have been able to assist her in that process the way I did. So in many ways, our voting laws are a lot harder, and voting is a lot harder now than it was 30 years ago. So there's been this trend to make voting harder. And we have to ask ourselves why, and I think some of us know. But the reality is, it's important to educate ourselves because, again, if the laws are this complicated and it's harder to vote, it's more the reason to find out what the right process is. And it starts with checking out these websites that John mentioned, votetexas.gov, the Fort Bend County website, ACLU website, League of Women Voters. League of Women Voters has some of the best information out there. It's a nonpartisan organization, and they're in every fight because they, like us, want to assure that every voice counts and every eligible vote gets casted.
This really is the last question. Explain how the Electoral College works in the state of Texas.
No. Obviously, the concept of the Electoral College goes back to the whole history of our country is defined by the relationship between the states and the federal government. The national government initially was a creation of the states under the Articles of Confederation. And it didn't work because this national government wasn't strong enough. So going back to the Constitutional Convention, that whole process and everything after that almost has to do with the relationship between the powers of the states and the powers of the national government. That led up to the Civil War. That's led up to a whole lot of things going on. And the Electoral College was something put into the Constitution to ensure that that the small states weren't trampled on by the more populous states, so that everybody would have a voice in the selection of presidents. I know Electoral College is not particularly popular. I like it myself. I know that if I lived in a state like Wyoming, that nobody would campaign there. My voice would probably not be heard because I have no electoral votes. So I think there's some value to it. And historically, it's really worked pretty well. It's most of the time the people who have been elected were the ones who got the most popular votes. It hasn't always happened. It didn't happen with James Blaine, I don't think, and it hasn't happened in the last couple of elections. But I still believe in the concept personally of that. Now, when you vote for president in any state, you're really not voting for president. You're voting for their electors. And then those electors will meet in January, I guess it's January, I've forgotten, but December, in their state capital, supposedly, and they will cast their votes for president and send those to the House. And that's what all that crap was going back 4 years ago, and when there was an effort not to seat or to seat different state slates of electors, which has happened before. It happened with the Dixiecrats with Adlai Stevenson back in the 50s, and it's happened since then with George Wallace. But it will happen again, I'm sure. But again, I don't know that is a reason to scrap the system. But essentially, when you vote, you're voting for an elector. And those electors are chosen in Texas by the parties at their conventions. So.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that because it is a complex process and I'm not an expert on the Electoral College. But all I want to mention is that one of the original reasons for the Electoral College was because there was a distrust from the government on the right of people to directly vote and directly engage. And so in many ways, the Electoral College is like a buffer. And so it's not as Mr. Oldham mentioned, it's not a direct vote. You're voting for electors. Those electors ultimately make the decision. Okay, so I just wanted to flag that big picture. The Electoral College has its benefits and its reasons, but also, you know, it's a reflection of the fact that it's not the people, we the people, that are doing the voting, that are putting our voice out there. So there are valid counter arguments to the Electoral College as well.
In a historical perspective, our founding fathers just fought a war to get rid of tyranny. And with that tyranny being the tyranny of a ruler, of an autocrat or a king, or the tyranny of a majority, which is something to be concerned with. It's, as you mentioned, it's a buffer there, and it's served us pretty well.
Thank you. So as we come to a close this evening, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to the organizers who made this event possible. Thank you so much to Pastor Roberts and the members of Pilgrim Journey Baptist Church for the use of this facility, to Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority and Pam Gaskins for reaching out to us at the League of Women Voters of Fort Bend, and to moderator Bernice Bell and our informative panelists for your expertise and efforts in our community. Your dedication and hard work shine through in every detail, and we are truly grateful for your efforts. I'd also like to take a moment to highlight the important work of the League of Women Voters of Fort Bend. Since our founding in 2018, we have strived to empower voters and enhance our democracy in this diverse and rapidly growing county. The challenges we face are significant, but our commitment to ensuring that every voice is heard and every vote counts is unwavering. There is still much work to be done, and we need your help. So we invite you to join us Whether it's helping to register voters, participating in Get Out the Vote events, or providing factual, up-to-date, nonpartisan information to our community, your involvement is crucial. Together we can make a difference and foster an informed electorate that is ready to engage in the democratic process. Thank you once again for being here and for your continued support of the League of Women Voters of Fort Bend. Let's keep working together to create a brighter future for our community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, President Green. On behalf of the Alpha Gamma Alpha chapter, Alpha Gamma Alpha Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, I would like to thank you for attending our joint public forum. We are so very grateful to President Green and the League of Women Voters Fort Bend for the partnership, and appreciative of everyone who had a hand in ensuring this event was a successful one, including all members of the audience for being here. Thank you to all members of Alpha Gamma Alpha Omega, our Social Justice and Connection Committee, and the Pilgrim Journey Church for welcoming and hosting us. Lastly, let's applaud our panel and our moderators. Thank you so much for empowering our community with the knowledge needed to make informed decisions, as well as what we need to do if someone tries to prevent us from doing so. Please accept this token of appreciation. Thank you so much. I know there's some further direction, so I'm gonna let Pam Gaskin, the boss, come up and tell us what we need to do next. But thank you so much.
Thank all of you for coming. Thank you, my sisters, for helping to make this a success. Couple of things before we're dismissed. On October 27th, we are partnering again with some of our other Divine Nine Greek organizations and Pilgrim Journey in their Family Fall Festival. It's going to be at Jones Creek Park on FM 359 from noon to 4. We're going to have all kinds of games and food, and we're going to have rallies, and we will have completed the first week of early voting, and we'll be looking forward to the next week of early voting. So we're going to be encouraging folks, if they didn't get out and vote, to vote. Now, a lot of what you heard today, especially the things about what to do at the polls if you have a problem, let me tell you how to really avoid that. October 21st is the first day of early voting. There is a voter guide out there, and you can go to vote411.org. They have these wonderful pins. I didn't bring it up here with me, but the pin has a QR code on it, and it'll take you directly to vote411.org. And on there, you just put in your address, and all of your races, the things that you're going to vote on, will come up. This is what I'm going to challenge you to do. I want you all to go to that site or pick up a voter guide and mark who you want to vote for. Because you can take a piece of paper in the ballot with you. You can't take your cell phone, you can't take anything electronic, but you can take paper. So because it's a long ballot. And if I live in Missouri City, we got like umpteen million charter changes to our city charter, some of which are kind of questionable. But I didn't have it, I'm sorry. But it's true. So you decide how you're going to vote and take that in with you so that you can complete your ballot. Vote from the top of the ballot to the bottom of the ballot. John can tell you this. I worked the ballot board for a few years. The thing that would break my heart as I was helping to open those mail-in ballots was to get a ballot and they only voted for president. The people at the bottom of the ballot are the folks you're going to see in the grocery store. I saw my city councilman in Kroger right after Beryl. And I said, come here, I need to ask you a few questions. I said, you know, there's a senior citizens residence over there, and they didn't even have a generator. How did y'all give them a permit? And he explained to me why, because it's an apartment, it's not a senior assisted living facility. But nevertheless, I said, well, y'all need to look into that, because if old people are going to be living there, they probably need their electricity on for their insulin, and some of them are amputees, and you know, and I know he was trying to go buy some ice cream, but I was like, no, you're going to hear me. This is what happens when you vote the bottom, all from top to bottom. The people at the bottom affect your life on a daily basis. We have all these judges. These judges, you want judges. There's a guy who says, I'm going to misquote him, but he said, if you don't vote on the day after the election, they're still going to be taking taxes out of your paycheck. And those tax dollars will be spent. If you don't vote, they're going to be spent. They may not be spent in your community because you didn't vote. Judges are still going to take the bench on November 6th. You want judges who are going to be fair. Judges who will not make up their minds about a case just by reading the name on the jacket. You want them to open and read and apply the law fairly and without favor. So judges are still going to be on the bench. And guess what? After the judges have been on the bench and money has been spent, people in Austin are still going to be passing laws. And you want them to pass laws that favor you, are in your best interest, and not in the best interest of people who could care less about you. So that was my little 2 cents. And I would invite you all to come and participate in the Fall Family Festival on October 27th. This church has been doing this out here for years, and every year it just gets bigger and better. So do that. We have some refreshments in the fellowship hall, and we have a voting machine. John brought a voting machine. If you want to go play with the voting machine, see how it works, they're going to give a demonstration. Just come on in the fellowship hall, get a sandwich, get some chips, get some cookies, and I think we are dismissed. My daughter just held up the sign, says I'm out of time. Thank you.
I'm Martha Castex Tatum, Mayor Pro Tem of the City of Houston and Council Member of District K. And I vote because it's my responsibility. When I cast my vote in every election, I'm standing up for my community and the values that matter to me. Generations before me fought hard to secure our right to vote. They knew the power of the vote, I know the power of our vote, and I hope you know the power of your vote too. It's our duty to carry the torch forward. Every time we step into a voting booth, we continue to stand for justice, equality, and representation.
I vote for my ancestors and for the future of our democracy, because I know that every vote counts and every election matters. Let your voice be heard.
I vote because I have young grandkids and I don't want them to experience the same type of hardships that my grandparents had to go through while they were trying to vote. In today's world, many young people feel as though they won't vote or they don't have to vote, and that attitude sucks. Let's all be an example to them and have them practice what we're preaching.
So the question was asked of me, why do I vote? Well, the answer is very simple. I vote because I want to take an active role in selecting the persons who are going to bring about policies that are going to affect me, my family, and my community. So I vote in every election, not just the top of the ballot, but the entire ballot. Will you join me?